Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of a podcast of Bronze and Iron. Today I have a very special co-host with me. J.R. Rowley is on a mini vacation, but nonetheless, I have one of the awesome members of the extended A Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones community, Lucifer means Lightbringer, also known as LML. What's going on, man?
Hey, I thought I was going to pretend to be J.R. Rowley. We ruined the bit.
You're
Psych.
You're both top three handsome. Both top three handsome, in my opinion.
Well, and J.R. Rowley has picked up my whole. He picked up my wall hanging game. He's got the cool brick wall, wood floor wall hanging, which looks absolutely great. So props to JR for that. Everybody should get wall hangings. I'm all about it.
Yeah, he just hit 1,000 subscribers last night or early this morning. So really excited for JR. He's taking a little bit of a hangout, and he will be back next week. But we had agreed to have you on the podcast, and it worked out to be perfect for today. We got quite a bit to talk about. There's been the HBO teaser, of course, that came out with Arya Stark last weekend, and it was only 6 seconds or so, but short but sweet footage. But today, what I would like to actually start off with is what I just mentioned, LML, that look that Arya Stark had on her face and the marvel that she felt when she finally saw a dragon. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's like a perfect shot to give us for a teaser, because we are kind of Arya, right? Like, we're looking up in the sky for signs of wonder, and we're gawking at them like, "Oh, look, it's a trailer." So it's very vicarious, where, you know, it's kind of just encapsulating that moment of building excitement. It's a perfect thing. Yes, anything about Starks and dragons coming together is very exciting. It feels like where the story has been building to, the conflict between the others and the dragons, the Starks and the Targs, who have mostly our main characters are Starks and Targs, you know, coming together. So it just tells you we're getting ready for the last battle. We're getting ready for the end. And so showing somebody like Arya looking up in wonder with that joyous expression on her face, while everyone else is terrified, sort of encapsulates everything that's coming our way, right?
It's crazy too, because if we think of the characters that we can look as like who are really themselves, Arya Stark is one of those characters. This is just so organic in herself. And we actually had the release of Fire and Blood not too long ago, and there's so many parallels between Aegon the Conqueror's sister Visenya and Arya Stark. Arya Stark being Jon Snow's darker sister. So I find this really ironic, and I have seen some other great videos out there. Great Arya talked about some talking points between Arya and another character, the John Quill. And I think that, you know, my next question for you, LML, is do you think that Daenerys and Arya are going to get along, and we can kind of maybe see an unexpected duo in Game of Thrones Season 8?
So what I see to be an interesting dynamic is basically both Stark sisters reacting to Dany, because they're essentially going to be protective of Jon, as well as, like, in addition to the political calculations, they're also going to be, you know, somewhat protective of their brother. Yeah. And so they're going to be cautious. They're going to be sizing up Dany. I do see both of them getting along with Dany, though. And I think, honestly, if the show is smart, they'll milk this for a little. It's almost like a high school drama kind of thing going on, you know, college freshman drama thing. It's a little sitcom-y, but that kind of stuff is fun and charming, and you have to have some of that in the middle of all the giant battles and White Walkers and dragons. You have to have those personal moments. So if I'm a good writer and I'm on the show, then I'm looking to make a little bit of fun with that, at least. But I see Arya taking to Dany probably first, and Sansa being, you know, wise and cautious, politically savvy. She'll probably keep more of a distance. They'll probably play up, you know, the little bit of tension, you know, between Dany and Sansa. But yeah, I could see Arya taken to Dany pretty quick. And at the end of the day, everyone's going to look at the dragons and be like, okay, well, we need those. And when you start sizing up Dany as a ruler, I think last season she proved that, you know, well, she's proved really all throughout her arc that she's willing to put herself last and put the needs of the people first. And so that's kind of what you want out of somebody that possesses a weapon like the dragons. You want to make sure that they are using them for the right reasons, right?
Yeah, and I mean, we obviously know that Aerys the Mad King is Daenerys' father, and she had some interesting conversations with Tyrion about how he was as a man, and she realizes that what he did was wrong. But I want to bring something up that you just talked about, and that's kind of this drama that HBO might be conjuring up. And in the first promo we saw the arrival of Daenerys Targaryen into Winterfell, and then we have obviously Sansa, and some people were saying that no, she was being smug, but in that moment, like what else is she going to say other than Winterfell is yours, your grace? I mean, like when Bobby B got to the north, like what else are they going to say? Like, oh, like we're not going to kneel in front of our king. Like this is just obviously the fandom, they have their bias on which kind of characters they enjoy and they don't. And I think that this kind of goes to show that they still think Sansa is Sansa from season 1.
Yeah, so there's a little bit of that. But yeah, so think about it, right? Like, how are you going to write this? Dany walks into Winterfell and everyone's just like, hey, cool, it's Dany. And everyone hugs and they get along and they just don't miss a beat. And they go, all right, let's plan the battle against the White Walkers. Like, that's not how the shit's going to go. There's got to be turbulence. There's got to be some drama. We've got a lot of strong personalities being thrown together in very stressful circumstances. People are protecting each other. They're protecting their fiefdoms, their power. They're protecting, the people they're supposed to care for. Everybody's got lots of interests. So of course there's going to be strategizing and politicking and caution and stuff like that. I just don't expect it to be the kind of thing where there's like this big Dany Sansa feud that like threatens to prevent them from like organizing. Like, I just think it's something they'll have fun with. And at the end of the day, I don't see that being like a huge thing,
Yeah, I mean, we pretty much know that the big battles are going to mostly happen in episodes 3 and 5, with the Battle of Winterfell happening in episode 3, and then possibly the Battle of King's Landing. And who knows, we may get some of this in the final episode. A lot of the actors and actresses have been talking about how the finale is shocking, and there's some really crazy things that go down. But I'm in agreement with you, LML, that they have to fit in some of these other moments, and this is part of what's going to make Game of Thrones season 8 so great is these connections with these characters that we haven't had before, and their experiences and how they've been shaped by their journeys, and them connecting and being able to share or talk about these things. And I think a lot of our characters have more in common than we think. There are, and this is partially why they are all still together and still, surviving this incredibly dangerous place in Westeros.
Can I jump in and build on that? Because
Yeah.
let's talk about Dany and Sansa. Like, who has endured more trauma than these two girls? And they're almost the same age. I mean, at the end of the day, I think they have a lot in common to bond over, right?
I mean, we spoke about this last week on the podcast when we had Vanessa Cole from Watchers on the Wall and the Knights Cast, and another awesome content creator. And we were talking about fighting the good fight on Twitter. I had been grounded by Gemma, Secrets of the Citadel, because I had gotten into too many arguments over the misogynistic nature of some of the Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones fandom. But that is something that we discussed, and I'm in agreement with you. I think that the psychological and physical abuse that they've endured as characters, and to see how far these women have come, these strong women, these strong characters that George has, built up for this kind of final act in A Song of Ice and Fire is just amazing. And I for one, me and JR have been talking about this quite a bit, are really excited to see the transformative, like that last transformation that Sansa and characters like Dany go through.
Right. And across the board, we've seen a pattern of the shift away from male power to female power in many of the houses and kingdoms. So I think that Dany and Sansa have been, as you read through their arcs, you see a lot of buildup towards their political acumen, learning to rule, learning hard lessons, very hard lessons, both of them. Whether you're talking about the lessons that Sansa learned from Cersei and Littlefinger, which is kind of, you're learning from a bad person that's also kind of, so you're not learning directly from them. It's almost like you're learning what not to do, but you're also learning where your mistakes will be exploited by wicked people like that. So it's a very indirect kind of learning. And then, Dany's learning from very difficult incidents, like when she tried to save Aroa, for example. Mary Door, that whole incident.
Lots of failure on Daenerys Targaryen's side, and more naivete as far as like Sansa goes. Lack of experience in some of these moments. But yeah, you're right. She's definitely learned from the best wicked characters, as you would say.
Yeah, and that's to be expected when you have 13 and 14-year-old characters, that they're going to be naive, and when they're in situations and they're being exploited by really awful people like Littlefinger and Cersei and Viserys, Illyrio. These, it's like that's why, again, I say they have so much to bond over, because they basically started off as heavily exploited characters. They took a lot of punishment, but they grew very strong. They survived that gauntlet, and they've come out, battle tested ahead of their years. And so now at the age of 16 or 17 or 15 or however old they are, now they've got a lot under their belt, and they're hopefully going to be competent and capable to deal with things to come. Because don't forget, the winds of winter are coming, the long night's coming, the big battle's coming. But what's the name of the last book going to be? A Dream of Spring.
And it was previously called A Time for Wolves. So,
right. And I think that the shift is interesting, because A Dream for Spring is like turning the page. It tells you there's going to be something after. George is going to tell us something about the world to come after the White Walkers are either defeated or pacified or held off or whatever happens. So people like Sansa, that's really someone I look to be around, getting ready to shape the world that comes next. I don't know about Dany. I see her more as probably going out heroically with Jon, potentially, but who knows? Maybe she does. I'm never going to get into that later, so I won't.
Yeah, no, definitely. I love the points that you brought up, because it kind of touches on, the Ragnarok and Westeros points that I've been touching on, this idea of transformation and rebirth that we will see in the end of the story. And I think A Dream for Spring, the title of, the last book of the series, is indicative of some of the things that, we are going to see at the end of the story. We're definitely going to touch more. We're saving the mythological fun magic stuff for the end of the podcast. I have another fun question for you, LML. Would you like to take a guess at Game of Thrones season episode 1's title? And I'd love to hear what you think are going to be some of, the main points in the first episode.
Okay, so I didn't have a title ready. So let me think about the main points first, and we'll see if I can work my way up to a title. So you know how they do. The first one is always sort of catching everybody up. But since these are 1.5 hour episodes, they're not going to do that for the whole first episode. And also, we've narrowed down the plot a bit, so we don't have quite so many locations. Yeah. So let's see. The last we know, we had the ship on a ship, right? We had Daenerys and Jon on the boat, on the love boat, and we had Bran sort of basically saying, "Oh gosh, they don't know what's going to happen," and they're on the way to Winterfell. So I would say that we got to start off with that. I mean, you can't really hold that off. The first thing we need to know about is Jon and Daenerys and Bran and Winterfell, and maybe they have a stop along the way. But I think before the first episode is out, we're going to see all those characters meet each other. And I think the logical way to do it would be to echo the beats from the first episode of season 1, right? Where King Robert's coming to Winterfell. I mean, we've already seen they're going that way in that little teaser. So why not do it up and look for as many connections as possible. So what was the title of the first episode of season 1?
It was Winter is Coming.
Winter is Coming?
I believe so. Was it not?
I see. I don't see why they wouldn't just use that title again, to be honest. So that's my vote. Winter is Coming. Just use the same title.
Wow.
Because it is, right?
I don't know, man. I tomorrow I'm going to be doing a Game of Thrones season 8 episode 1 scene by scene breakdown and try to predict that. I know it will probably be going horribly wrong, but as my predictions often do.
Well, that's my guess. Winter is coming.
Okay, I can dig it. I mean, we started off the series with ice, right? And then we ended off season 1 in fire. And I suspect that perhaps the last episode is A Dream of Spring, and maybe episode 5 is A Song of Ice and Fire. So those are kind of my 2 for episode 5 and 6. But my brain, I don't know. I haven't really. I can't come around for a title for episode 1. I've really had an issue with that.
Well, I like your thinking for the other two guesses where, it's the last season. So use all the big keywords, winter is coming, a dream for spring, a song of ice and fire. They're definitely gonna.
A
That
Song
makes
of
a lot
Ice and
more.
Fire has to be one of the last two episodes. I think it has to be episode 5 because I think that the Night King / Jon Snow, Daenerys, whatever the big battle's gonna that last big battle's gonna happen in episode 5. I could
Yeah, I
be
mean,
wrong.
they're not gonna title it like, so you fucked your auntie or whatever.
Yeah, no,
Not gonna.
I don't think Jon Snow is Azor Ahai. Yeah, they're not going to be doing that. So that's I guess my biggest question, and then we have a question from Patreon LML. And Andrew Burnett, one of the hype bringers from Patreon, says, my biggest question, I think it will come to play in episode 1 is, what will we see / get from the Crypts of Winterfell? Will we see the Kings of Winter? Will we see a little gift left from Lyanna to Jon? Or will it be the bigger moment, Samwell Tarly and Jon Snow, or someone else, consoling Jon and talking about his heritage? So what do you think is going to be the Crypts of Winterfell? Do you think it's going to be playing a big role in episode 1?
Yeah, I think it's the logical place to have one of these really tough conversations. Maybe the Bran and Jon conversation. It's like that's what we've used the crypts for. We've seen Robert and Ned down there. We've seen Littlefinger and Sansa and Jon down there talking to each other. Mostly kind of like RLJ centric stuff. Of course, in the books, Jon has this reoccurring dream of the crypts and trying to work his way to the end of the crypts. And, you kind of get the vibe that, while Jon is dead, we're probably going to get some sort of chapter from Jon where he's in a dream state, maybe even talks to the ghost of Ned or Lyanna, possibly gets the RLJ reveal that way or a clue about it. If he completes his crypts dream, we'll get the answer to, what's in Lyanna's tomb, or is it Rhaegar's harp, or whatever it is. Now, in the books, I'm kind of coming to like the idea, Kyle, that the hold the door moment might be in the crypts, and that you might get Hodor and Bran coming back underground somehow, and something like that. Or I also liked in the promo when they showed the Mists and the White Walkers coming into the crypts in like a reenactment of the Blood Raven cave scene. I definitely think they're gonna use that crypts location for both conversations and an action scene. And here's my outside prediction: crypt sex.
Oh, dude, no.
Yeah. Jon and Dany in front of Lyanna's statue. That's yeah.
That is, I mean, I wouldn't put it past George to do something like this. It's certainly, I mean, HBO likes gratuitous sex, and apparently there will be intimate scenes in Game of Thrones season 8. I mean, why wouldn't they have that if people are in love and they know they might die in some sort of horrible way? So I'm not completely off that, but I don't know if I necessarily like to coin the term crypt sex as like some sort of.
Oh, I coined it months ago.
One thing that I really like and that you talked about is and one thing that was actually missing from the teaser was Bran. He wasn't with Sansa, Jon, and Arya in that crypt scene. And some people hypothesize that it's because Bran is the Night King and he's the Mist. And I actually had you and Aziz on to discuss this one with JR, so we're kind of rehashing that and talking about this again. But yeah, I think the Crypts of Winterfell have to play an important role. And my kind of tinfoil thought is we never got to see Ned bring back Dawn to Starfall, and I actually think that that's going to be in the Crypts of Winterfell. And I actually think that sword, I think it's going to play a bigger role than we think. And I know a lot of people have kind of poo-pooed that, but I do think that that's going to make an impact in Game of Thrones season 8. And it was so prominent as imagery, in the Lyanna and Ned scene. So I think we have to see that again. The sword was stuck in the ground, as we saw, before Arthur Dayne fought Ned with it. I just think that is going to be hugely impactful in Game of Thrones season 8. I could be wrong.
No, so I like this idea, and I think the fact that they showed it leaning against the bed so prominently in the Tower of Joy scene is definitely makes it possible and realistic that they're going to use the sword again. I don't think it's they have to, but if they did, you're going to look back to that and be like, oh yeah, that's the sword. You know, let's say because you got to remember they're also producing this for the casual viewer, not us who've read all the books. You know, the casual viewer will probably be like, oh yeah, that's that sword from that scene. I mean, that's maybe all they'll think, but
us degenerates who like to look into every point of connection for these things. And what's interesting too is that Ned killed Arthur Dayne with that sword. He physically picked it up. He put it at the bedside of Lyanna. So these are actions that, you know, Ned took with this sword, and I find that certainly interesting. You know, and I think that, you know, since Jon, I mean, the Azor High prophecy, we haven't heard it spoke as much as we have in the books and laid out like it has been in the book. So I find that, you know, that this is certainly an interesting connection to Jon Snow could be Azor High. And I think, you know, we're going to talk about this a little bit after the Azor High prophecy. So anything else about the Crypts of Winterfell, David?
Well,
I don't know.
That's cool. You can dox me. It's cool. You can call me Dave. We're friends in real life. We've hung out in real life on multiple occasions now. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that counts. We have a reoccurring friendship. Woo! Even though, and it's a cross-border friendship too. You're my Canadian friend. Actually, one of two. I have two Canadian friends.
I'm looking outside the window right now, and where my window is situated, it's, you know, where the window starts is about, you know, 2 feet off the ground. And then if you go up, you know, it's about 7 feet, you know, capping at about 7 feet. If I can't actually see over the snow from my window. So yes, I am currently in the lands of always winter is what I'm trying to get at. I am your friend in the north, David, truly. We actually got the third highest snowfall count since, well, ever in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. And the Great Lakes are 90% frozen over. So I'm assuming that this is actually foreshadowing for Game of Thrones Season 8, that 90% of the realm actually might become frozen. So I don't know. Some tinfoil for you.
It might even go too far where, like, if you live up there where you are, it's the last thing you want to see is like a show about the White Walkers and like more snow, you know, like winter, like, damn it, I got enough of that outside. But no, seriously, I did have one more thing to say about Dawn, which is that, you know, I'm always into comparing the show and the books. And in the books, you know, Dawn definitely is at Starfall. However, there is a very logical and plausible way that Dawn can come out of Starfall and enter the fray that seems to be foreshadowed. And Aziz and I sort of came up with this way back when we were talking about the Danes and the Great Empire of the Dawn. But basically, there's a good chance that Darkstar might be about to steal it. And if Darkstar steals it, somebody needs to kill him because Darkstar sucks and he can't wield Dawn. So what I'm predicting is that since Fagon, you know, the young Griff who is pretending to be, you know, Rhaegar's son or whatever, he's basically like the fake son of Rhaegar, right?
Yeah.
So who better to have in his Kingsguard than an imposter version of Arthur Dayne, which would be Gerald Dayne with Dawn? Because what's going to happen is Gerald Dayne is not going to be bearded in his den by Obara and Arya Hota. He's going to escape. He's going to have Dawn. He's going to show up in King's Landing and he's going to join up with Fagon. He's going to be in his Kingsguard because Fagon would want that as a sign of legitimacy. There's Arthur Dayne's son with Dawn. I mean, you're Rhaegar's son. It's like, it's perfect. And so then what you're going to get is somebody's going to kill him, and then Dawn is floating free. And eventually, if George wants to get it in Jon's hands, it'll get brought north at that point. But in the show, and this is my point, in the show, they don't got time for all that. We don't have Darkstar, bloody, bloody, bloody. So it would make sense if they just did a shortcut and we'd be like, oh yeah, no, it never went back to Starfall. It's been in the crypts. And then they pull it out of the crypts. That would be cool. I like that idea. It's a logical shortcut. It'd be very exciting. You know, why not?
And, you know, I mean, Bran, one thing that's really interesting about the show too is that Bran says, well, this isn't the story my father told. So Ned hiding information that he killed Arthur Dayne and trying to protect Howland. This could, I mean, this isn't explained in the show, but this could be, you know, how it kind of unfolded in the show, because Arthur Dayne was incredibly respected and all of that. So there's a different scenario, obviously, that unfolds with that here. But Andrew, thank you for your question. But yeah, I think me and David both agree that the Crypts of Winterfell is going to play a significant role in one of the first couple of episodes, and maybe even later on. Who knows? We might see another Stark laid to rest down there.
Yep, that'd be a good way to end it, or somewhere near the end, something like that.
Yeah. LML, I spoke in my last video prediction on Bran Stark talking in season 8. One of the main themes will be the realization and focus on the present moment. And it's something that I think that, Bran Stark, he's lost piece of himself, and now he's the three-eyed raven, and we constantly see these characters being pulled into the past or into the future. Antique Gamer remarked, had a really interesting comment in the comment section on this video, and she talked about characters who are great lenses into the human condition. Do you think that this is going to be one of the main themes in Game of Thrones season 8 as we wrap up the show story?
Well, I think that time is the use of time both in the books and the show has been interesting, and especially when you get to Bran and the idea of existing in different realities at once. So it's almost like it's all about synthesis to me. That's the way I would put it. Synthesis of ice and fire, harmony of opposites, balance of winter and summer. And so, when you talk about being in the present moment, it's sort of like the synthesis of the past, the future, and the present. Being able to use the lessons of the past, thinking about what will happen in the future to guide your actions in the present moment, something like that.
Yeah, I definitely like that, and because I think the Azor High prophecy, which is something that we're going to go deep on, is these transformative moments is that multiple characters are going to have these transformative moments where they have to make this decision that is going to impact whether they survive or not in this great battle that we're going to see happening in Westeros. Quick announcement here. If you are enjoying this content and want to see more podcasts like this one, and you're enjoying the listen, please leave a like on this video, as it very much helps out the channel, and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on any of the future content of the channel. Also, make sure you go check out the description of this video for links to Lucifer Means Lightbringer LML's YouTube channels. He has one called Between Two Weirwoods, where he does absolutely fantastic live streams and collaborations with other members of the A Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones community, and all of his social media will also be in the description of this video. All right, let's have some fun. Me and you, we've talked about mythology and magic and prophecy. Let's kind of get into more of the fantastical elements of A Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire. Let's start off with the Children of the Forest, LML, and the backstory of the Night King. Will we be seeing any more of this in Game of Thrones Season 8? I've been chatting about this with some other content creators, Jer from Geek Chat 1, and I'm a little bit concerned because we are getting the Game of Thrones prequel, and it does seem as if we are going to be focusing on some of these topic points. So are we going to get that big payoff in Game of Thrones Season 8 concerning the backstory of the Night King and perhaps the Children of the Forest?
So this goes back to one of my first gut reactions to last season. Was it last season that we saw Night King being created, or was it 2 seasons ago?
2 seasons ago. I believe it was season.
It was. You're right.
Yeah,
it was
2 seasons ago.
So when I first saw that, I got pretty excited, and that was back before we knew about the Long Night show. And I said, oh, well, because people are always wondering, what is it about the others that's going to make them more interesting than just demons? Like, we all expect there to be some nuance there. They don't necessarily have to be good guys, but maybe they were wronged in the past. And so the reason why they're so pissed off is because there was some ancient sin committed against them. Or perhaps, they used to be men and they turned to evil or something, and I'm talking about the books here where we don't know exactly how they were created and why as much. And now in the books, what we have is the Children of the Forest tying this guy up, Todrick Stark, to the tree. Everybody's in on the Todrick joke, right? Your people know what I'm talking about, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So Todrick's tied to the tree, and he gets turned into a White Walker because the First Men are pressing the Children of the Forest to extinction. That's the story that the show went with. I think the book version will be a little bit different, but let's stick with the show. So as soon as I saw that, I said, well, this is interesting. If they want to make the White Walkers interesting, all they have to do is tell us about Todrick Stark. Why is he there? How did he get tied to that tree? Did he do something bad? Is he an innocent victim? Is he a green seer? Is that weirwood tree like something he's connected to? Or is he just a rando? You know, like, is he a dragon person? Like, all these, anything that they want to give us about Todrick's story up to that moment would be really fascinating. So now that we know they have a long night show that they want to set up, there's a question of, well, how much are they going to give us? You know, but the thing is, these guys are running a multi-million-dollar TV enterprise. So they're going to use this last season to set up the long night. There's no question. I mean, that's a no-duh thing to do for marketing. So I think it'll be a good mix. I think we'll get some info on Todrick Stark, but the info that we'll get will make us want to know more, and it will turn us on to the scope of the world that they're going to give us in the long night show. That's basically what they want to do, is not just like, oh, we're going to watch the long night show to find out about Todrick Stark. Be like, no, we should find out stuff about Todrick Stark's world, the pre-long night world, in the last season that makes us realize how big the long night show is going to be. We should get this little glimpse into all the different factions, and that there's this big long history that we don't know about that we need to know about, so that we really want to watch the long night show. So I do think we're going to get enough information to understand why he was tied to the tree, but it's going to raise even more questions. Right?
I find it so fascinating because you brought up the great point that there isn't this large history that we have in the books about this time period. So we're all essentially going in with the same amount of information. We have, things that we can, research from the world of Ice and Fire, or, that we can take from the text that we've, understood from our own perspectives. But it just, I find that so fascinating, and how they're actually going to pull this off in the show. And one thing that makes me think about, like, what is the third twist that George told Dan and Dave? And personally, I've been on record in saying that I believe it is with Bran Stark and the Night King. If you guys are Harry Potter fans out there, I actually, for the way they specifically did it in the show, when, the Night King grabbed Bran, I think Bran and Bran will be becoming more and more cold. And, the idea that Bran could be like the Night King's Horcrux, so to speak, that they are linked, they are physically and mentally linked. And that's part of the reason why the Night King was able to hatch the plan with the dragons beyond the wall, is something that I personally think that they might go with. And and when the part of the wall was breached last season, if you look at the overhead shot, the formation of the army of the dead certainly made it seem like that could be House Stark's direwolf representation there. So I think that, yes, we have to get that. And I know there's a lot of criticism for Dan and Dave out there, but I actually think that this is going to be something that they have to do for Game of Thrones season 8 to truly have the impact that we think it's going to have.
So in the books, it's strongly suggested that Night's King was a Stark. And it's suggested that he was taken down by his brother, Brandon the Breaker Stark. So the idea of the original Night King struggle being some sort of familial struggle makes a lot of sense. So without going down the road of going, oh, well, Bran is the Night King and there's some sort of time circularity thing, you can observe that if the Night King is, I'm talking about the show now, if Night King is an ancient Stark, then he's Bran's ancestor. And so that already makes it a familial struggle. And the same thing with Jon. So the idea that Bran has some sort of magical tethering because of that touch, that ice mark touch, that's definitely makes a ton of sense. And if you even want to go further and project that, well, maybe that ice touch, that little patch of ice on Bran's arm is going to take over his whole body eventually and turn him into a new Night King, then that is a compelling idea. The idea of more than one Night King, a Night King that, you needs a new Night King, where the old one's got to, just like the last Green Seer, Bloodraven is dying and he needs a new one. It could be a similar thing where the others are looking for a new Night King. And in the books, Joe Magician and I have talked about the idea that when the others battled Waymar in the prologue, they were essentially looking for Jon. And if it had been Jon, they might not have just killed him, but tried to transform him or take him prisoner and turn him into a new Night's King. Because in the books, we haven't seen any sort of Night King figure. We've only seen groups of others. And so one wonders, maybe they need a leader, and then you get into the whole idea that the prince that was promised is really the prince that was promised to the others. and that Jon represents, you know, the Starks sort of owe a baby to the others. You know, have you heard my theories about how
No,
the
no,
Starks?
no. I've loved Joe Magician's video on the prologue, and I find it super interesting too, because I actually think this links up to what we saw in our first appearance of the Night King, when the Night King touches a baby and the eyes turn blue, because we still have to figure out why in the hell they're doing that. And that's, I mean, baby Sam, and there's this whole other thing with, you know, I mean, it's obviously touched upon more in the books with Craster and the sacrifices of the babies, and there's a baby swap with Mance and all of that, Mance's baby, and all that. So really,
So you were talking about the third twist.
Yeah.
I would guess that the third twist will probably be having to do with the ending. Like, the thing that we need to do to appease the White Walkers is going to be a big surprise. And it's probably going to be more to do with pacts and pacifying and, you know, neutralizing than it is just simply beating them with swords, right?
Yeah, like breaking the wheel. I personally believe that, and this is interesting because this is actually me and you both got to see George R. R. Martin in Redwood City together, and he had some very interesting things to say about Bran Stark and magic. And, you know, because the question was asked, you know, who is the hardest character for you to write? And he said Bran Stark, because of magic and how old Bran is, and having to deal with the age of Bran and magic, and not screwing up magic in your story and then ruining your whole story with these, you know, time loops and paradoxes and things. So I found that incredibly compelling, and I think that it's all connected to the subject that we are currently talking about.
And in fact, Brandon Sanderson, who has, you know, written a lot of fantasy and also has a writing podcast, he always talks about the most interesting part of any magic system is the limits that you place on it. You know, unlimited magic is pretty boring. That's why Superman is boring, quote unquote, to a lot of people, because he could just do everything, right? It's more interesting to see somebody that has, you know, more limitations on the magic. And George really believes in that. He limits all of his magic. He limits our understanding of it. He limits how much we see it. He limits what people can do with it. And that does make it more interesting and wondrous when it does happen. So.
Well, okay, here's something interesting then. Let's kind of expand on this. Let's talk about the pros and cons of the wheel being broken, or what you talked about, this idea of there being another Night King. Because I personally think that it's interesting, because a Song of Ice and Fire, we have these repetitions, these echoes that are repeating itself within the story, and that's part of the reason why I love it so much. You know, I've talked about the hero's journey and the repetition of people experiencing these other events that people have experienced previously, and them happening to different characters. So, David, let's go through the pros and cons of the wheel being broken and the wheel not being broken.
So there's a couple ways to think about that. We can think about the wheel being broken. Like when Daenerys talks about the wheel being broken, she's talking about negative cycles of behavior that keep people enslaved. And that's the wheel that she wants to break. However, when we look at Game of Thrones as a whole, a lot of it has to do with the cycle of the seasons, and the cycle of day and night, and the cycle of life and death, which in classic mythology have always been overlaid with one another. So winter equals night equals death. Summer equals life equals, you know, you get it. So
this was well, quickly, David, just to jump on that, if you watch The Last Jedi and Luke's explanation to Rey about the Force, I feel like that's kind of a perfect example of what you just spoke of. Sorry.
Yeah, so it's very much that's why George has married a lot of European folklore having to do with the cycle of the seasons to sort of Taoist philosophy of yin and yang, because there's a natural harmony there. Like George talks about, like, understanding that winter and death and night, they aren't evil, they're part of a cycle. You know, death gives way to life. Like the old men in the north, they understand they have to go out hunting, quote unquote, so that there's enough food for the young people. Like that's part of the sacrifice. You know, the leaves that fall from the trees, they rot on the floor and they make nutrients for the new life to grow. And so all of that cycle of the season stuff is really important. Now, think about the long night. What the long night is a stopping of the cycle of the seasons. And that's why it's so evil. It's not because winter is bad. It's because winter is bad when it doesn't give way to spring, and when nighttime doesn't give way to day, and when the dead rise up out of their graves instead of staying dead. So all three of these cycles have been broken and basically corrupted. And that is the biggest problem in the whole story. So what we actually need to do in that sense is get the cycle turning again. When the long night stops everything, the main characters, they've got to lube that wheel and get it turning. The cycle of the seasons turning again. And usually the way to do that is with heroic sacrifice. And that's what we're going to see. And that's all the, you know, Green Man, Corn King mythology. Like these characters, they die, and their sacrifice feeds the people and turns the seasons, and they're resurrected with the spring and all that stuff. So
this leads into my favorite, absolute favorite topic in A Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones, Elemental, and this is Azor Ahai. We had you talked about you talked about this at Con of Thrones last year, and I'm sure you're going to be speaking about it again. David's got a sword right now. He's
Foam Keeper.
Foam Keeper. One thing that I really love to talk about is I spoke about the hero's journey, and I spoke about this, and you talked about nature. So you had a nature cycle panel, which was fantastic at Con of Thrones last year. I believe you have the link to that on your channel, David. So if anybody wants to go check that out, you can go check that out on Lucifer Means Lightbringer's channel. But one thing that I want, kind of segue into is Azor Ahai and this transformation, that the idea that your old self needs to die for you to be enlightened or have this Lightbringer moment for you to be able to move forward with, the sacrifice that you have to make, or this moment in your life that will ultimately change the outcome of how you look at the world. So I think that is one of the big things that, one of the themes that we are going to be seeing in Game of Thrones season 8.
Yeah, definitely. And we've seen that. We've seen the symbolic death moment, the transformation moment in characters' arcs. We've also seen literal death transformation moments. So George likes to riff on this a lot of ways. And I think me and you are roughly on the same page with our understanding of Azor Ahai and Lightbringer. We both, for example, consider Azor Ahai Reborn not to be one person, and not even to be just Dany and Jon, but actually sort of more like a role that all of the heroic characters step into. And it's really just George's own spin on the hero's journey, or what it takes to be a hero. That's kind of what he's talking about. And I've explored the idea that the Azor Ahai myth is actually trying to trick us a little bit, and that it's giving us this story about a dude who stabs his wife to make a powerful weapon. But then when we see Beric light his sword on fire, what does he do? He lights it on fire with his own blood. And he essentially died trying to defend people. And that's also the way that Jon went out. So to me, the lesson is that it's heroic self-sacrifice that's going to, like I said, get the seasons turning again, or make somebody a true hero. And then as far as like the whole idea of being reborn, this just makes for any good writer is going to show you dynamic characters that overcome obstacles and transform themselves. And frequently when you have a really traumatic event, you grow and change so much that it is like a actual sudden transformation or rebirth. So those themes are all over the story. George develops them in ways big and small, and it's definitely a fun thing to key in on. Is there something in particular that you wanted to drill in on the show with that theme in mind?
I just think that for the show version, I think that we will have someone that is announced as the Azor Ahai. One character will be looked at as Azor Ahai, and there will be other characters that have these kind of moments. Like Jaime Lannister, for example, when we take the White Book, he doesn't like what is written in there about him, and he will have some sort of redemption where that changes and someone writes something about it. And but he could be looked at as one of those characters. And of course Daenerys, but they are all going to have different iterations of these moments. But the person that ultimately that could really have this fiery, Jon is I think the example that we're looking at. I think that he will be the person that will, if there is striking a killing blow on the Night King, I could be wrong. I think he will probably be that person. And I think that, it'll be a little bit different in the books in the show. So I think that in the show, it will be kind of represented. It will be a representation of Jon.
Yeah, I love the idea of, Jon confronting the others / the Night King on the physical plane while Bran attacks him on the astral plane. I think that something like that is bound to happen.
Well, it's really interesting too, David, because I spoke about when Arya got the dagger from Bran, and he said it's wasted on a cripple, and he was supposed to be killed by that dagger in Game of Thrones season 1. And this kind of goes back to Bran being touched by the Night King and the idea that the only way to actually stop the Night King is to also kill Bran. So Bran stopping the Night King in his tracks for a moment so Jon can have that split second to realize, oh, he's frozen. Like Bran has got powerful enough. And when they are battling as what we call the Weir Net, Bran figures out a way to stop the Night King, but that also means sacrificing his physical body. And I think it would be so bittersweet to have Arya, who has that dagger, to, kill Bran. I mean, how sad would that be? So I think that there's actually more behind that. It could be tinfoil, but I mean, I think Bran was just delaying the inevitable. When he got saved, that was just an inevitable. It just prolonged Bran's life for him to get just to that moment where he could stop the Night King, and then finally we have this. Bran and the Night King are both done, and they are linked in that way.
I actually have wondered about the idea of Jon needing a mercy killing after he's all done with everything, because he might be a white. And he might be like, look at Beric, the way Beric was like ready to die again after he had been resurrected. He's like, dude, this isn't so great, Thoros, So, and there's a passage in the books where Jon hides in the crypts and covers himself in flour, and Robb leads the other kids down. And this is like a memory. So this is before any of the books started, when all the Starks were back in Winterfell. So Robb leads all the kids down into the crypts, and Jon jumps out covered in flour and pretends to be a spirit. And everybody is scared except for Arya, who gives Jon a punch right in the stomach. And she's like, it's just Jon. The thing is, when Jon is stabbed at the end of A Dance with Dragons, it says Bowen Marsh punched him in the stomach, and when he pulled his hand away, the knife was still there. So he described that knife wound as a punch. And so with Jon being dressed up like a ghost, when Arya punches him there, it made me wonder, like, maybe Jon's going to need a mercy killing. And obviously Arya, the idea of mercy killings it's woven all through her plots. She's literally called Mercy, and she's killing people out of mercy at times with the whole faceless man thing. So,
and Melisandre, when Jon went to speak to Melisandre, don't bring me back again in the show, that is certainly interesting as well. So there's something in my gut that is just telling me, and in the books, we don't. It's hypothesized. I mean, George actually announced that Bloodraven took Dark Sister to the Wall, so it's quite possible he took it to his cave.
Yeah, I would think so.
And then perhaps maybe Arya gets Dark Sister, being that parallel that we spoke about earlier with Visenya, those kind of connections. So I think there's something interesting there, certainly, with Arya. And I think what makes it even more interesting, David, is Arya's journey and how much she's changed along that journey. Her being able to make that decision, and Bran knowing that Arya can be the one to make that decision. Like, hey, I trust Arya will be able to do this. So in either Jon or Bran's case, it would be difficult for Arya, but I think she's the strongest one, or the one that would be able to do that.
Yes, definitely. Like I said, the whole idea of mercy killing is all over her plot, and she would be strong enough to do it, and she would understand the idea of a mercy killing better than anyone else. So.
All right, we got some fun towards the end of the podcast here. LML, there have been odds that have been pertaining to the chance of the characters that may die in Game of Thrones Season 8. Let's play a game of Live or Die with percentages. So I want you to give me a percentage on these characters. I have about 10 here, and I'd love to hear your percentage on Jon Snow's chances of dying. Is it survival or dying? So.
I think it's about 50-50. He'll either die heroically, or he'll end up being like the new Cold Hands, or in the show, Cold Hands Benjen, if you will, meaning like he'll still be a white. He can't go back to the land of the living, and so he'll just wander the haunted forest forever, or until, for hundreds of years or something. It's either that or a heroic death, so I'd call it 50-50.
Damn,
dark so either way, though.
That very dark, bittersweet ending for sure. I actually think that Jon's going to melt down the Iron Throne, so I am like 90% convinced he's going to survive. His current and new partner, Daenerys Targaryen. What about her?
I think that she is very likely to die heroically. She probably will have the best death out of anyone in the series. So I'm going to call that like 80%.
And that won't be in childbirth, as you think it's going to be like getting half crushed by her dragon, like Rhaenys or something like that?
I think like flying Drogon into the ice dragon and like something crazy like that. That's the way I see it. Or maybe injured from battle, and then you get the scene where Jon Snow
promise me.
Yeah.
And then Jon sticks his blade into her, and
no.
Okay.
I don't think that's gonna happen.
I'm trying to twist your arm on that one. Sansa Stark. So I actually think that Daenerys is 100% dying. I'll put it at 99%, 1% chance of her surviving. Sansa Stark.
This is the one I'm the most confident in. 100% she's going to live more than anybody else. I mean, her and Sam are the best bets to live, I would say.
And by the way, out of all of the new promotional posters that are out there, Sansa's is my favorite. And then I got to think that probably Davos is after that. But she's looking, yes, queen. Yes, queen.
Yeah. She almost looks like a blue mermaid. I love it.
Okay, so Ghost. The chances of Ghost surviving Game of Thrones season 8.
Very low. In the books, I think Ghost will actually die when Jon is resurrected, because Jon's spirit will be in Ghost, and we've been shown in the books that after a few days or a couple weeks, those two spirits will begin to mingle and merge. And in order to resurrect Jon and get his spirit out of the wolf and back into his body, which is going to be harder in the books than it was in the show, I think it's very likely that the wolf body will have to be sacrificed, but Ghost spirit would actually then go back into Jon's body with Jon, so he'd be like a wolf man or something. But so in the show, I'd expect Ghost not to live either. Although I don't know, maybe if Jon is a new Cold Hands, maybe you see Ghost with him out there, but probably not.
Yeah, I'm giving a 90% chance of death for Ghost here. And then we got Drogon. What do you think about Drogon? The chances of him? I think he's going to be a goner.
I don't think any of the dragons will live, so I call that 90%. No.
Yes, same. I do think we are going to have and this is kind of a little bit out there, but how Viserys died, I think that's how he's going to kill Viserion. I think he's going to melt the head off Viserion, and they're going to have this crazy dragon battle. I think Drogon's going to kill Viserion.
I dig it.
Cersei Lannister. This is a pretty easy one for me. She's 100% dying.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, so she's dying. Tyrion Lannister. Now, this is an interesting one because there's some interesting theories about, there's all these people pushing the Tyrion betrays Jon and Daenerys, or Daenerys in season 8 theories out there. I personally think Tyrion's a great bet to survive the series. I'm going to put him at 90% surviving. What about you?
I'd probably say like 65% surviving.
Okay.
I could see him dying, but I think he will survive.
Here's another interesting one. Sandor Clegane.
Definitely gonna die protecting Sansa or Arya.
90%. This is an interesting one. I've flip-flopped on this, but I like the idea of Arya giving him the gift of death at the end somehow. I think the Clegane Bull is definitely going to go down, so that's going to be pretty interesting. But I'm going to go 50-50 here. I think I don't know. I'm kind of, maybe this is more biased because I love Sandor so much. Arya Stark
sails a boat off into the sunset sea. 75%.
Yeah, I actually think Arya's 100% surviving the series. I think she actually goes back to Bravos, especially in the show. I think she goes back to Bravos and takes over Lady Crane's role with her own path.
I think she does the Nymeria thing and sails to a new land.
What's west of Westeros? Yeah.
Yep.
And here's one last one, and this one's pretty interesting. Bran Stark.
Neither.
Yeah, this is interesting, right? Because
I just with the weird net and lives it forever, but not as a person. Right, exactly. Something fucked up like that.
Transcendent. Yeah, I think his physical body dies, but I think the actual final scene of the show, I think it's going to be like Winterfell being rebuilt or something, like Jon's cleaning his sword, and then we hear like the idea that Bran is in that raven or tree or something like that, something ambiguous. I think that's what's going to happen.
I like it. I like that.
All right, so we are at the end of the podcast here, and I have one question left for LML. What are you most excited for in Game of Thrones Season 8, my friend?
The meteor attack. No, they didn't. They missed the boat on that. They should have done that at the end of last season when the wall fell, but they did not. So I have to say that, I mean, I'm looking forward to all of it. But if you just want like a fun answer, then I would just say the ice dragon versus the fire dragon. I mean, I'm going to be dying to see that. You know, that's not the thing I care about the most, but it's like the fun thing that I'm looking forward to the most.
And I mean, they got the budget for it. They got the monies for that in Game of Thrones Season 8. And
let me give you a slightly different answer. Mostly, since I care about the books, you know, more than the show. I came to the books first. Bloody. I'm looking to see how they land the plane on the show, and I'm looking forward to just using all that information to make guesses and comparisons to theories about the books and whatever we see in TWOW, which I think we'll hopefully get pretty soon after the end of the season, you know, so that by the time the year is out, we might have TWOW and the end of the show to consider, and we'll just be a lot closer to seeing how George might be landing the plane. And that's what I'm the most excited about.
I'm calling September for TWOW. I don't know, just call it a gut feeling. I think we're getting it this fall. You know, I'm obviously really excited to see what they do with the Night King and the White Walkers and how they kind of navigate that, because, you know, we obviously got the prequel, and I think that they really need to nail this part of the story to make Game of Thrones Season 8 impactful. Thanks so much for joining me today, LML. Can you kind of tell us what's up next for you, my man?
Yeah, so, you know, I do a live stream every Sunday at 3 Eastern, and that's the Mythical Astronomy Starry Wisdom Sunday with Sanrixian and Sanrixian live draws, and I have other Mythhead guests on, and we do our thing. We'll be turning that into kind of a show pregame this year, so we'll be covering the show on my channel. So, you know, you can look for that at 3 Eastern. And Kyle, we've talked about doing a little cross-pollination where we come on each other's coverage. So nothing, I would say, just, you know, look forward to seeing me again. I'll be around. Go check out my channel, and we're all looking forward to the season. We're gonna have a bunch of fun with it. So
yeah, there's more to come. I'm gonna get LML to. And are you going to Con of Thrones, LML?
I'm going to both Con. I'm going to Ice and Fire Con and Con of Thrones this year. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't make the Ice and Fire one. I kind of have to pick and choose my battles. I would love to go. I probably end up going next year. But yeah, I think we can perhaps arrange something at Con of Thrones too. But you will see more of LML. And of course, if you did enjoy this podcast today, please go check out both of his channels. Of course, Between Two Weirwoods and Lucifer Means Lightbringer. You can find all of the links to his social media and all that in the description of this video. Thanks for joining me today, and thanks everyone for watching. I'll see you all in the next video.
Get hype.
Oh, damn, LML. Okay, we got LML's going to do the outro here. Here we go. 3, 2, 1.
Hype and love.
Oh, yes.